Members, the question is the motion be agreed. Because I like his contributions, I'm going to give the call to the Honourable Kyle McGinn.
I want to firstly thank the Honourable Matthew Swinburne for bringing the motion to the House. I think this is a very timely discussion for us to be having in this House, and it's very critical, I believe, that we talk this out and, as members' contributions have said already, is find solutions on where we're heading. Look, my experience with automation has been scary, to be honest. In the maritime sector, automation has always been a threat to workers' jobs. A couple of years back, travelled over to Los Angeles and was very lucky to get a tour of the Los Angeles port. And the Los Angeles port is one of the biggest in the world. And I went down with the president of the Longshoremen's union over there, and we went down and had a look at operations while it was happening. And there was thousands of workers on the port, thousands. There was at least 3 ships in, big Maersk liner container carriers, and there were cranes operating everywhere. There was trucks running up and down the wharf. There was people stacking containers out the back. There was supervisors. There was admin staff making sure that everything was operating. It was amazing to watch. It was like poetry in motion. And then the president took me over to Long Beach Port. The Long Beach Port was the first that I was aware and the biggest automated port in America. We drove onto this port, and the first thing I noticed was there was no people. There was the same sort of trucks that were going on the last port didn't have a cab on them. They were just a 4-wheel base with 2 axles that had a container on top, and were running around the port, hundreds of them, and they were completely in line, completely going where they were supposed to, no crashes, not off target at all, and off they went. And then we got down to the cranes, and they were all fully automated as well. There were 2 people standing up next to where the containers were being picked as spotters. And I asked a supervisor that was one supervisor for the whole area, and he had everything on an iPad. Absolutely everything was being controlled, and he could make contact with on an iPad. Behind the cranes was the containers being loaded onto trucks that were leaving the port. So when a truck driver came in, they reversed into the position where they were targeted to be. They got out of the cab, popped into a protection box. Then the automated crane come across over the top of it and dropped the box on top of the truck. They got out of the cab, hopped into the truck, and off they went. So I asked the supervisor how this all happened when we went from thousands of workers to 2 spotters up the top. And he said, well, the company settled with having them spotters there, but the reality is they're not doing anything. The reality is eventually they're going to be taken away and there'll be 0 people there. When we were standing there talking, one of the trucks stopped, one of the automated Matthews stopped. It then reversed and took off to this shed. So when the battery was running low on these Matthews, they tell themselves to go back to the workshop where an automated crane takes off the old battery and puts on a new battery. So we don't even have the maintenance jobs in respect of replacing a battery on the automation on this port. So when I spoke to the president about how this affected the stevedoring in Los Angeles port, they lost thousands of workers to this one port, thousands, and they gained 180 maintenance jobs. So we've seen a labour pool go from thousands to 180 overnight. Now, I will definitely concede automation is expensive in the maritime sector. If you want to build an automated port, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and the productivity is at the point where, yes, eventually the productivity will outdo the human workforce, but that's not what it's about. That's not what I seen what it was about in the maritime sector. You know, the maritime sector in Australia has a proud history of standing strong for their rights and conditions, a proud history of standing strong for safety. But the attacks that we've seen whilst I was with the MUA came more to remove a workforce to stop industrial issues. That was the attack, was to say we want to get rid of that human element. Whether it's productivity or not, they would accept the fact that they could remove the union from that workplace. Now, when I asked the president where the crane drivers were, because I thought crane drivers are pretty skilled role to have, you know, like it's a pretty skilled position. And I'm looking at the cranes, and they were dual lifting containers. 2 containers at once were going onto this ship, which was phenomenal for me to see. And he said, "Oh, come back with me." And we drove about 2 kilometres back to this building and went up the top. And we walked into this room, and there were 2 desks. And at these 2 desks were some computer screens and 1 person standing in front of them. And simply all they were doing was turning off alarms when alarms come up when a container went onto the ship. There was no, that I could see, super expertise that they needed to do that role. And this went from having a team of crane drivers that were trained, that had families and everything else, a team of crane drivers down to 1 person standing in front of a computer. Absolutely scary stuff. Up in the Pilbara region and the mining and pastoral electorate, I think another aspect of automation that's scary to me is we don't fully understand the impacts that we're having on our young people or on the future jobs. Because when I walked into Kmart in Karratha and seen automation put into Kmart, I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe that in a small town we would take away jobs out of Kmart for automated machines. Now, you know, you see it in Perth, you see it everywhere, automation's coming in. But what I don't think the employers understand or care about is them jobs were typically high school students that were performing part-time work. That was a gateway employment for so many people in high school. It's also employment for people in university who can get that part-time role. We've now taken that away. So instead of having 3 or 4 kids there after school doing the checkout, we've now got 1 manager that stands there and makes sure no one does the five-finger discount, which I think is another downside to automation that employers didn't see either, because I'm sure they started losing a lot more of their goods once they realised that the machines don't detect stealing. But it's scary to think that we put these automation in, and again, it's about profits. That's my opinion, is that it's about profits for the employer in that space in retail. Because they take these kids out, they put the automation in, where do these kids go? You know, they get to 18 years old and they haven't had an entry job because they couldn't get one, because automation took it away. You know, that's Kmart, Big W, Woolworths, Coles, you know, you could go all day on all these retailers. And it's really sad to think that we didn't think about this entry-level job and how we could have at least monitored some percentage still in there. You know, the employer has a social responsibility. We talk about social responsibility, particularly in the regions, in the mining industry. Well, I think all big businesses and franchises and chains that are out in them regional areas have a social responsibility. And they should be focusing on making sure that the community's not impacted so that their back pocket can get bigger. You know, the mining industry, obviously the Honourable Jackie Boydell touched on that, and also the Honourable Matthew Swinburne. You know, what upsets me the most is, you know, you go into discussions with an employer around automation and they say, you're not going to lose jobs. You're not going to lose jobs where, you know, this job will get replaced. If you want a voluntary redundancy, well, you can have that. We may be able to place you at another mine site in that same role, but eventually that's going to be automated as well. But the problem is, for me, that we're reducing the labour pool. So, as I said with the example in LA, there were 2 spotters there that the company agreed to put there, but they're not going to be there forever because they're not needed. So they may create roles in a short term where they say, oh, you know, no one's lost a job, but slowly but surely that labour pool will reduce until we get back to where the reality is 1 person's controlling 3 or 4 trucks and we've lost a workforce. If you look at 2-swing system, that's, you know, six jobs. The other problem is, once you take the job off of the work site, they can put that job anywhere. Let's have a look at the call centres. How quickly did they get offshored? You know, how long would it take for the technology to come in? And I'm sure it's already there, where instead of driving them in Perth, which everyone's thinking about, reality is the automation will lead to jobs here in Perth, could end up overseas. What's stopping companies from taking it away from us altogether and doing our mining over in India? You know, there's nothing stopping that from happening. Now, the other problem, and I'm going to run out of time, but what about the automation that goes into them retailers? Why aren't we building them? Why aren't we creating another industry to fill that gap in the labour market? So not only are we automating things for better productivity for big business, we're not even making the automation that's taken our jobs. A lot of that's coming from China.